Intro music. The weekly way. Oh, I can't spend the nose. The weekly way. Oh, can you tell me who? The weekly way. Did you see her? The weekly way. I'm glad you stopped by. Take him to him, baby. Take him up again. Tell me who? Yeah. This is going to be the dirtiest intro of all time because I am still chewing. But Keith Humphrey, what's going on, brother?
What's going on, brother?
Thank you so much for taking the time, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, man.
There's many things I want to ask you about, but I think the place I want to start with is, when did you pick up the guitar, and when did you turn into such a nerd of the guitar itself rather than the playing of the guitar? Like, when did you start dissecting instruments?
Oh, man. Well, it was a weird one for me because I started... my dad was a musician, and so it was kind of like this natural thing of, well, I gotta play at some point, and so he eventually was like, what do you want to play? And I was like, I want to play bass. I want to be like my dad, you know? So I was playing bass, but this is the weirdest thing, and I always tell my guitar students this. They're always like, "What the hell? What is?" I remember seeing the SpongeBob movie, and the Goofy Goober rock, and I saw him just laying into that Goofy Goober guitar or whatever, and I'm like, I want to do that.
Does Patrick play a flying V in that?
Okay, no, that's the Mandela effect, man. He plays a Les Paul. It's a peanut shaped guitar. It kind of looks like a Les Paul. But everyone remembers it as a flying V. It's not.
Is that really like a discussed Mandela effect?
Yes, it is.
And now I think you're fucking fooling me.
No, I'm not. I wish I was.
It's a peanut-shaped Les Paul?
Yeah, look it up, man. It's a peanut-shaped Les Paul.
That kind of disturbs me. Okay, but so tell me, you were inspired by it?
Yeah, I was inspired by that, and so eventually I asked my dad, like, hey, can I get a guitar? He's like, you got to be really fucking good if you're going to play guitar. I'm kind of leaning towards no, but I'm like, hey, give it some time. And so it took me a couple of years, but then he started seeing I was serious. And so I self-taught myself up until 7th grade.
When did you initially get the guitar?
Oh man, hell. I probably would have been about 10. I think I'd been playing bass for like 2 years at that point.
So you kind of had 10 to 13, 14 just to explore it on your own.
Yeah, really. And then...
okay, Reddit, SpongeBob movie, possible Mandela effect. I'm opening up Reddit. This will clean up my history.
Oh, yeah, it should.
Let's see. We got a... Why is it in Spanish? Why is it... That's what I'm talking about, brother. Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.
Maybe my Wi-Fi is not going to work down here. Oh, my girl.
But you should look that up later. For anyone
this
watching,
is such
look that up.
shit. Yeah, please. Let's see.
Yeah.
I'll drop an image in later. I'll just download this so I have it. There is no way he definitely plays a flying V in the movie. I've never seen this Les Paul.
Well, there's that, and the way that I justify it is, there's that one cutaway where it like shows a real person playing a guitar.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a Les Paul, dude.
That's disturbing. The scene I most remember with the guitar is when he's hanging and just like spinning, and they ask him to be taken down.
Oh yeah.
And like that's when I remember seeing the flying V. I thought, but that's super upsetting to be honest. Okay.
You're not the first person to say that either.
Yeah. So I guess I'll dig on my later time when I'm deeper in the Bud Lights. But
yeah.
So at 13, did you start taking lessons, or did it just kind of like shift in terms of your interest?
Yeah, no, it was, well, my dad had made me start playing saxophone in the school band in 5th grade too.
Nice.
And so I picked that up. I was playing that, but then he was like, if you're going to get serious about like this guitar thing, you probably ought to get some lessons. I'm like, all right. So I ended up taking lessons from Paul Holdman, who's like a local... I hate saying blues guitar player because the guy can play just about anything, you know. But like rockabilly and blues is, I mean, that's like creme of the crop for him. But he can play just about anything. I took lessons with him for It wasn't very long. It was only like a year and a half or something like that. But, that's where I learned, the pentablonic scale and, all this, crazy shit. And it's like,
That's a
oh,
good way
here's
to
a
put it.
Dorian.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, here's a Dorian mode, and I'm like, oh, man, I just want to, and that's it, right? But
So you were learning modes at that young of an age?
yeah, my dad, like, when I was, I think, like 8 or 9 years old, he printed off the Circle of Fifths, and he's like, learn that. That's everything you're ever going to need to know.
That's super intense.
Yeah.
Do you think having that kind of, more zoomed out perspective, and also being a kid starting on a monophonic instrument where you're reading and you're playing in the ensemble kind of a deal, shaped the way that you would eventually look at your place in the band?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I would say that, while some things might not have been, the most pertinent to what I was doing at the time, damn, I'm glad I did everything I did. And so if I ever show up, even though, I'm talking to the truth about, hey, man, can you get me back on the saxophone and the flute a little bit? It's like,
He'll do it.
Yeah, I know.
He'll get you in.
Well, I need him to teach me how to be a motherfucker on flute, too.
Dude, I never respected the flute like that until Chris came into my life, and I was like, goddamn.
Yeah. But no, I had a great saxophone and woodwind teacher, too, Jay Young. And I got him in high school because the deal was, like, when I went into high school, I'd quit taking guitar lessons at that time. And the deal was they basically wanted me to start taking woodwind lessons because I wasn't terribly good at it my freshman year. And I was in, like, the lowest jazz band and the lowest concert band. Started taking lessons, and they noticed I was really picking up steam on it. And by the time it was ready for my sophomore year, they were like, hey, we need a Barry player. You want to skip a couple bands and go up top and play Barry in the top jazz band, the top wind band? I said, hell yeah, I do.
That sounds sick.
So I played Barry in there for a couple years, and then I think it was like my junior year, the guitar player they had just wasn't really cutting it, so they ended up, I was split in half and half with Barry and guitar. And then senior year, I just ended up playing guitar, and I was playing contrabass clarinet because they needed a big guy who could do that at one point.
So did you always kind of see yourself as a utility player?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, because in my mind, it's like you've always been a guitar player. I didn't know these other things about you. But I think at a young age, if you view yourself as, when they give me something, I'm going to learn how to do that, you have a different perspective of just fitting into the music and not overplaying in that space.
Yeah. It was, and that was a really good turning thing for me too, was my dad said, you need to learn to play everything, and you need to learn to play it to some degree. You might not be the best on it. You might not be able to hang your hat on, say, I'm a jazz guitar player, or, oh, I'm a rock guitar player, but you can at least fake your way through any of that stuff, and you'll be convincingly good enough at it. But you got to know how to not overplay and play the part. Playing in pit orchestras and stuff like that helped too for musicals and stuff, because then it's almost like a wedding band thing where you've got, maybe 8 or 10 parts you got to cover, and you have to convincingly fake it through that to the untrained ear. To us, we're like, oh, that doesn't quite sound like something, but to everyone else, it's pretty damn close.
Yeah, well, as someone that you and I often don't get to play together in that band, because normally they're going to give me the opportunity to go and try to do the lead parts and sing in the band, but I don't have the meticulous nature to learn those parts really that well. So
yes, you do.
Why? If I took the time and I actually had some respect and discipline for the music, definitely. But I grew up as a guitar player that was just trying to get the widest category of songs so I can go passably play them in a bar. So I was never really learning parts. I was learning chords, and most of the time it wasn't even the right chords necessarily. So now, as a young adult, and I start to look at the arrangement, the composition as a whole, I'm starting to realize how fickle that pursuit was and how much the education I missed out on.
Yeah.
So were you a kid that picked apart records you loved, or were you the type that, as you were shown things in lessons, as you were shown to implement, you got those underhand, and then that eventually applied to learning tracks?
Well, I think part of the big picture too that it was a thing was my dad was in this Indianapolis band called Polka Boy. They're not a band anymore. Now it's their Polecats. The lead singer passed away a number of years ago. Rest in peace, John. But they covered everything. And so when I was a kid, you know, I thought everyone's dad who was a musician had some cool ass band like Polka Boy. Because, I mean, you know, they got 3 or 4 accordion players up there and they're playing fucking Sledgehammer, the Lido Shuffle, My Sharona. And, you know, I tell people it's a polka band. They're like, oh, so they do like, you know, like a polka version of My Sharona. I'm like, nah, man, they're doing the whole, you know. That's clipping your
Yeah, I was
mic a
gonna
little
say
bit.
you took me a little deeper than we expected.
That one, I won't turn that one on. But
You're fine. I have many questions to go
Yeah.
over in that, but so when did you start to look at the guitar as something that you could modify to your own taste and timbre?
I think, well, I always again blame my dad for this. I was snapping strings left and right as a kid, you know, on my Squire Strat, and I was popping them all the time, and I was like, Dad, can you restring this for me? I broke a string. Can you restring this for me? I broke a string. And eventually at one point he's like, I'll buy you some strings. Learn to do it yourself. All my tools are down in the basement. I was like, all right, well, I'll figure it out. And, you know, a couple, you know, wound it wrong this way and put the wrong string on there. Eventually it got to the point where I was like, okay, I can restring my own guitars. It's pretty cool. Then I had this Epiphone SG that the jack kept falling out. And so I asked my dad, like, hey, can you solder this for me? He said, sure. And he's like, but next time you're doing it on your own. I said, okay. So I learned how to solder, and then we swapped some pickups in one of my guitars. And then he's like, all right, next time, you know, we're not taking it to Mikey. You're going to learn how to do your own pickup swaps. Now, mind you, I didn't know that, like, after soldering a new jack on, my dad didn't really know what he was doing. Like, he knew what to do, but he'd never actually done it. He just made somebody else do it.
Yeah.
So we had a bar down in the basement, and eventually I just pushed all the booze over to one side, and I busted out a screwdriver set and a socket wrench set, and I just went to work destroying guitars for a little while.
That's awesome.
Until, you know, a few really crappy, you know, router with a Dremel jobs later and a couple botched fret jobs and stuff, I was like, okay, I think I know what I'm doing now. And it wasn't until I got to CCM where I started realizing maybe people don't actually know as much about this stuff as, you know, I thought everyone knew about that, because I didn't have very many guitar playing friends in high school. I only had like 2 or 3, and they were like, oh yeah, I do my own setups and stuff. So I just thought everyone knew how to do that.
Yeah.
And my roommate Tristan was, I mean, he is one bad dude on guitar. He's incredible, but I mean, he would hand me his guitars in the dorm. He's like, here, do your thing. I like the way your guitars play. I was like, all right, you know, do this here, and you know. And then as for modifying them, I never really saw the guitar when I was a kid as like this, you know, beautiful work of art that I had to preserve to some degree, because my dad's basses were all beat to hell and they were all modified. I mean, his Rickenbacker had a freaking precision bass pickup here and a jazz bass pickup here and a pickguard that took up almost the whole thing. His jazz bass had a replaced body on it. His Tobias, the knobs were falling off and the wood was worn away from his thumb. So I didn't know that like there was this whole culture of like collectible instruments that people
leave it alone. It needs to have the original cabling, the original pots, everything.
Yeah, no, and then when I found that out, I think probably around like my junior or senior year when I really started getting into gear, I was like, okay, maybe some of this stuff I shouldn't dick with, but as for right now, everything I've got, you know, I'll modify it. I don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, even this is a $4,000 guitar almost, and I've ripped out all the electronics and swapped them out.
Nice.
You know, now would I do that?
So that's a true custom shop.
Yeah, it is. If I can get there's the badge.
Beautiful.
Right there. Yeah. But
And what was the first thing you did with it?
Well, I left it as it was for a while. I bought this, I think, my sophomore year of college. It was all the money I had.
Yeah.
You know, but I left it alone for a while because I was like, oh my God, you know, this custom shop guitar. It was my first like really, really expensive guitar, and I bought it with my own money. I was like, you know. But Zach Myers, actually, I did a BWK gig, and the bridge pickup on this thing was kind of feeding back, and it was really bright. And I was like, you know, how'd it sound? He's like, I'm not gonna lie to you, man, your tone kind of sucked. It kind of sounded bad. And I'm like, man, fuck the Zach Myers guy. I'm driving home all pissed off, and I got close to my house, and I was thinking, maybe he's right. Maybe my tone's bad. So then I'd had a set similar to these with a different output and another telly that I had gotten rid of. And I was like, maybe I'll give these another shot. So I called Lindy. These are Lindy Fralin split blades.
Cool.
I called Lindy Fralin's shop, and Lindy answered the phone. And I told him, like, man, I play jazz, but I do a lot of weddings and stuff. What do I put in this? He's like, well, what were you thinking? I said, how about the split blades? He's like, that's probably what I'd tell you to do. I was like, can you overwind them a little bit so they're a little bit hotter, a little more output? He said, yeah, no problem. And he's like, you want anything else done to him? I said, 3-way, I'm going to put a 4-way switch in this thing when I put those in. He's like, yeah, I'll put a 3rd wire on it for you. So when I got these pickups, I put this 4-way switch in there too. So
and tell me how you can toggle between then. So
yeah, and I wire them a little unconventionally. So most people do bridge and then both in, I think, parallel and then neck and then both in series. I do it so it's bridge, both in parallel, both in series, and then neck.
And what's the difference between both in parallel, both in series?
Yeah, so bridge pickup's nice and spanky,
Yeah.
right? But then this is like your traditional funk setting. So it sounds almost like a humbucker, especially if I were to throw a little drive on that. Oh, let me pull that down so I don't kill us.
Yeah, my bad.
That's pretty good. So if this is like normal, like what an in-between of a telly would sound like.
And that's your 3 position?
Yeah, and then this would be the middle position, and then this is the new one.
Series? And so that kind of has a more concealed tone. It's a little bit more low mids kind of.
Yeah, and it's a little more output, especially if I just had a chord and switch between them.
Interesting. Is that a phasing thing?
Yeah, something like that. I'm not the best at describing things, but it's basically instead of like one signal like going through, they're both like on at the same time is kind of what it is. So like parallel is like both at the same time, and then series one's going to the other.
Gotcha.
Something like that.
Yeah.
If somebody knows better than me, please correct me. I want to learn more.
Not enough people watch this show for us to find an expert, but please talk some shit in the comments. Let's find
some
something.
shit.
Yeah.
Tell me I'm full of it. I'd love to hear it.
Well, so I was someone that I was always very, very unexplorative with my electric guitars.
Mm-hmm.
It was 3 switches and everything was always dimed. And then to find out on my Gibsons, no, the reason you go to the middle is so you can blend between your volumes. Something as simple as that. And it seems like you had a very particular mindset for how you wanted this guitar to shape up. So, from a traditional telly to what you got, what were kind of the big tone aims?
Well, when I started playing, I had a Squier Strat, and then eventually I got an Epiphone SG because I saw a bunch of people playing SGs, and now I hate SGs.
Really?
And I hate Strats. Well, I don't hate Strats, but
how would you hate SGs though?
They neck dive a lot.
Okay. But they feel so good against the body. There's
do
nothing
feel
there.
good. But
Paper thin.
I run into the same problem with an SG that I do a Strat, and that I sweat a lot, man. I'm a big guy. I sweat a lot, and
You also put it in when you're playing. You go after it.
I go after it, right? And there's right along this edge here. There's a lot of paint chips and stuff on this now, but the paint is starting to wear away right here, and that's from my arm. And the problem I have with Strats, SGs, Jazz Masters, Jaguars is when I'm really hammering in, I'm trying to get some shit out of it. My arm has nothing to hang on to. So it slips, and I sometimes actually find myself missing strings and missing licks.
So it's kind of like it's the third point of contact that you're following through with.
Yeah, and that's why I gravitate towards, I've got a Gibson 347. I used to have a Heritage, got rid of that. Probably shouldn't have, but I got that amp out of it, which that's cool. So.
Nice. Heritage is a great brand of guitars, but there's something about if you want a 335, go get a 335. Now, if you have them and you want to get something that's more particular, more well-loved on the manufacturing side, Heritage is certainly there for it. But as a kid, I remember really looking at that brand and wondering if I wanted to make that jump, and then I ended up with the blessing of the 335 in my life, and I'm so glad that I went exactly for the guitar I was looking at. Yeah, rather than bouncing around. It's I'm sure you know the difference now between wanting something and selling yourself short of that, and then having to go back around and losing money in the process. And
I don't know how many guitars I've owned, and I feel so bad for my parents having to deal with, like, they'd come downstairs and my dad's like, when the hell did you get that guitar? And I'm like, somebody drove over to the house the other day. I traded something for it. He's like, what the fuck did you trade now?
Yeah.
You
What
know?
was the best and the worst trade you ever did?
Ooh, well, best in in value or in just like
personal acquisition. Most excited about.
Well, the best one, honestly, this most recent one, this is pretty cool. It's out of shot, but there's a 1965 Fender Deluxe non-reverb over here.
Is it a blackface or?
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. It's one of the, like, pretty much middle of the road black panels, and it had the original speaker. Pretty much everything was original except for a couple caps and the tubes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know, man. I've only ever owned 60s and 70s Fender, like late 60s, early 70s Fenders. I don't know how I'm going to like the black panel stuff. I plugged this thing in. I'm like, oh, shit. Now, I swapped the speaker in it because, that old speaker was getting a little tired, and it's like they're not making Oxfords anymore. So I figure, give it a retirement, put it in a box. If I ever want to get rid of it,
Yeah.
I've got it. But
Well, and if you put it in the box before the wheels fall off, you could always pop it back in when it comes time to either frame it against something and say it's originals, you're going to have it, or, for the resale value if you ever need to go that way.
Yeah.
So what'd you put in?
that is an Eminence Swamp Thing.
Cool.
I have been a huge fan of Eminence speakers for probably about 4 or 5 years now. It's the only brand of speaker I'll use. Unless something, comes with a selection and it sounds good. They just have a lot of meat, brother. And
Yeah.
it really changes the way every amp sounds. It adds more meat and it adds more headroom. I put a 10-inch, I think they call it a Raging Cajun in my Princeton.
Yeah.
And that just had like some stock selection, and I put it in there. That amp used to break up around 4. That amp breaks up at like 5.5 or 6 now.
Nice.
And the amount of low end, I was like, holy shit, this isn't a Princeton anymore. This is like a deluxe, like, younger brother. This thing kills.
And is a 10-inch your favorite speaker size?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I find that the variety is the flavor of life. Everyone likes to have a couple of different options, but when you're talking about a 13-piece band or just being the only chordal instrument, there's something about 10 that's just a perfect middle of the road that you can get through it and you can also fill it,
Yeah, well, and it doesn't, to me, a 10 doesn't have as much low and like just straight up lows, and it doesn't have too much of the straight up highs. It kind of sits more in this compressed spectrum, which when you're with a 13-piece horn band, you've got everything going on, so you kind of have to find where you sit best. And honestly, if BWK or anything else wasn't as loud as it was, I'd gig my Champ.
Yeah.
I've got an 8-inch in that thing, and I put another Eminence speaker in that, and it sounds like a 10. And to me, Eminence speakers, if you buy the right one, they punch way above their size class. You put a 10, one of their 10s in there, sounds like a 12. You put a 12 in there, it sounds almost like you got a 212 going on sometimes.
Yeah, is most of your experience with this more of your live gigging facility, or are you tracking with these and kind of comparing what you like in sizes?
I don't track much, man. Like, honestly, it's something I want to do. It's something I did in the past back when I was in high school, especially because my dad had built a studio in our basement.
Yeah.
But no, it was, I'd read up a little bit on them like every, glue huffing guitar player does. And I'm like, oh, man, well, the black panel sounds better than the silver panel, and the tweed sounds better than the brown panel. And, eventually you just got to try it, because I've played pretty much everything I've wanted to. For the longest time, I had wanted a Telecaster. And my dad's like, no, you want a Strat. And I'm like, all right. And my godfather, he ran sound for Pat Benatar and Billy Joel back in the day.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, so, and he hated Telecasters. Like, in his attic, Telecasters were banned. You couldn't even bring one up. So I grew up like, Telly suck, they're for country. Until I got my hands on one, my junior year of high school. I went to a pawn shop and I got it was a thin line, 2 humbuckers.
Nice.
I was like, man, this is all right.
And it's like is it the fat humbuckers?
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. I've since swapped those out. Go figure.
Yeah.
But no, I played that for a while, and then I was like, well, maybe I should get a traditional telly. So then I got like a parts caster out of a pawn shop for like $100. It ended up having a Warmoth neck and custom shop pickups, and I fell in love with that. And I started realizing, just playing around with that, and I'd swap a pot out or something like that, like, this is a modular instrument. All this is a cutting board with a baseball bat cut in half with a couple pieces of bent metal bolted onto the thing. And it's, it's really resonant, and it can do just about anything you want it to.
Yeah, and for clarity of routing things and just
Mm-hmm.
being able to move around, like you said, like it is very modular, and I think that's something that the Telly's coming into a different level of popularity with our generation of guitar players.
really has.
And I don't know what that is exactly. But one of my favorite Telly players of all time is Prince.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Prince is playing this shitty like Honer, and
Yeah.
he's running it direct into the board 90% of the time. And it just sounds right. It's like I think the basis of it being so flat and being so modular, it sounds like your hands.
Mm-hmm.
And if your hands sound great, then it's perfect. But if you're a guy that needs a Les Paul to scream, or you need a Strat to spank, it's like, then that's just the expression of your playing needing a little bit of a crutch.
Yeah, it does. And I've never been a huge Les Paul guy. I've owned, I think, 2. I sold one because it was a piece of shit, frankly. It was in one of the bad years. I mean, the neck was overhanging the fretboard, dude.
Ugh.
It was bad. And then somebody gave me, I still have it. It's in pieces. It's a 74 Les Paul Custom. The top's been stripped. There's no fretboard on it. Like, it needs restored. And I'm just waiting till I have like $4,500 laying around. I'm just going to put it back in. It belonged to a family friend who passed away, so it's like got a lot of sentimental value in it.
Yeah, and you want to do it right.
Yeah, I did like, as good as a junior in high school could do. I found a fretboard that didn't really fit, but it's glued on there right now.
Yeah.
And I had the pickups, and so I ended up wiring it up, and it didn't play all that good, but it played. And my dad like opened the door one day. He's like, "Larry's soul is in that guitar. You better play the shit out of that." And so I'm like, "All right."
Do you
cool.
believe that? Do you believe that?
It sounds like Larry, even as much of a, Larry McCullough was a just hyper shredder. And my dad and him and Kevin Couts and, oh God, I forget the keyboard player now. They kept exploding. They just couldn't hold down keyboard players because the music was too hard. Yeah, even with that, and as much of just like a blues lawyer as I was in high school, without the money, my dad was like, "Yeah, you sound like Larry when you play that guitar." So I think there is something to be said about like a broken in instrument. It really, the wood absorbs people's sweat, and it kind of just, it's got mojo.
Totally.
Yeah.
Mojo for sure, but I think there's also something about like the same way that your muscles carry memory. It's like there's objects in our lives that carry memories of certain people. And I think when you have something like that folks emote through, there's something about literally the way the fretboard's worn in that says you're going to be inclined to go this way with that. It's like a well-worn road leading to somebody's house. It's like, no, you keep to the left side here and you keep to the right side
Yeah.
there. It's just kind of how it is.
Yeah, well, and even then, my dad's got this old 72 jazz bass that the body had been swapped out a long time ago when he bought it. And that thing has got the most mojo magic you will ever get out of an instrument ever. I mean, I've lost count of how many people come up to him and say, "Hey, what do you want for that?" Because as soon as they play it, they're like, "Oh shit!" And that's like one of like the dog years of Fender too. It's not like one of the golden years or whatever, which I still think is kind of horse shit. But
The guitar is going to tell you if it's worth a damn. It's
Right.
like there's so, and I'm kind of worried about this. It looks like the market of just collectors' guitars is about to eat absolute shit, and I don't know why that is, but I just feel like from what I looked at when I was in the 8th grade, and I was so excited as a young guitar player to say like, oh, they have these pieces and they're worth 25, 30 grand. Like you can have your retirement in guitars. Like I don't really think that way anymore.
no,
I think that when you have instruments that don't play well, then they're not really worth a damn. And yeah, you're going to find maybe one guy that's willing to pay that number and just wants to put it on a shelf. But that person is becoming less and less impressed by the instrument.
Yep.
What you tell them is a value.
Well, and especially sometimes I'm thinking like, if I'm going and playing some shitty bar or, like back when I was doing like the Tin Roof tours and stuff, I'm rolling up to somewhere that I have no idea what I'm going to get into here. If I'm playing this rig, I mean, my amp right there is worth $2,500. His guitar is like bare minimum, like $3,000. And then I've got, a Helix. Like I'm touting around a big line of gear opposed to I could bring my Princeton, which as much as I love that amp, I know I can replace that because I made a lot of them and I can get a run-of-the-mill Mexican Strat or Tele or something and bring that on the road with me. It's like if something happens to it, I can get another one.
But it's important to have parts of your rig that feel expendable, and there's a lot of things that too deserve to be compromised. It's like, as much as the Helix is an expensive piece of equipment, it would seem to me that was a musical compromise you made to have infinite opportunities, infinite patching opportunities as well in sounds. When did you decide to make that switch, and how close is it to the board that you used to lug around?
Well, the funny thing is I've never used individual pedals. Never.
Always been a multi-effects guy?
Ever since I can remember.
That's crazy.
Yeah, well, I say that as there's a reverb pedal sitting on top of my head, but that's just for reverb on the end, No, so my dad played Chapman stick in this prog band. And because those have like a stereo send, you have to split it off. So he would send the bass side to like an octaver and like a chorus or something like that. And then he had this Korg multi-effects board. It was like some cheap one. And I found that sitting in our window one day, and I'm like, "Hey, Dad, what is it?" He's like, "Oh, it's for the stick. If you want to use it, you can." I was playing on a Fender Mustang amp with like a bunch of digital modeling, so that was my effects.
Yeah.
And then I brought that. I'm like, "Oh my God, whoa! I can do all this crazy stuff." And I was playing that, and then I think it was Christmas one year. My dad's like, "What do you need for effects? Do you want to go the individual pedal route? Do you want to do multi-effects?" And he kind of gave me the pros and cons of both, because his whole thing was, he said, like, individual pedals you can make a bunch of changes on the fly. With multi-effects it's a little harder to do that, but with a multi-effects board you have more tonal variety. And I'm thinking, well, I'm learning a Yes tune one day and I'm learning a ZZ Top song the next. I figure I probably need a decent amount of tones. So Christmas came and Santa Claus brought me a Pod HD 500X, and I played that. I played that for like 7 years. I got that in middle school, played it up until my freshman year of college, until I think it was the power cord was kind of getting frayed. Somebody tripped on it, cut that, and then spilled beer on it. And I couldn't get it to boot up for a while until I just got like a second new power cord. Eventually it came up, everything was erased on it. And when I say everything, I mean even the factory patches were gone. So I was like, okay, well, now I know this board might not be as durable as I thought it was, even though I had carted that thing around everywhere. So my dad and I ended up splitting the costs on the Helix, and this was probably the second greatest investment musically I've ever made, aside from ear protection.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this thing is already paid for itself. My dad didn't ask me to pay his half back, but I gladly would if that's what it took for me to keep using this, because I don't have to worry about, I want a new sound. I got to go, search on the internet for 3 hours to find a $300 Strymon or whatever, when I could just and have something that's comparable in sound. And again, to the untrained ear of like what you and I are doing, who's going to know if we have a $300 pedal versus a click on the Helix?
Totally. And there's something to be said, like when I'm sitting here by myself and I want to mess with the trem pedal, it's like, I love the sound of my trem pedal, but do I want to worry about that if I'm playing at a tin roof, if I'm opening for a band and I don't want to lug an amp out? It's like, the greatest thing for me has been going XLR out and saying front of house is going to get exactly what I intended them to get.
Yep.
Because I killed enough amps on the road and had enough issues with people miking up the wrong spot that I was like, I'm done with that phase of my life.
Yep.
And also being the tinkering type, there's someone that could sit there with, okay, I click the effect, it sounds like garbage, but I know where I want to get to, so I'm going to get there whether you like it or not.
Yep.
As you started to kind of develop the way that you wanted to work with that instrument, how did you evaluate your signal chain?
I'm Spartan as hell, man. I know like a lot of people, use effects loops and stuff like that. And I experimented with that whole thing for a while. But what I found, the tone that I like, is I just run everything into the front of the amp. I still do use an amp. I always have one with me because I never know if it's going to be a thing where the sound guy is going to be like, I want an amp, versus maybe he doesn't want an amp. So I usually bring one and then I say, hey, do you want me to use one? And if so, do you want to take a line from my board, or do you want to take a mic from my cab? And depending on what they say is how I set this up, because I have an amp sim right here. And if I dime my amp right, it doesn't change it too much. So that's it without it. And then if I put it in, whoops.
I've never seen such a flexible knob on a Helix. I mean, clearly you have just worked the hell out of this thing.
Oh, God. Yeah, that thing's pretty beat up. I have to tighten it every once in a while because the shaft actually on it broke, so I had to like glue it back in place. But this is without it. And then I put it back in. It just adds a little more drive and a little more
brightness and
a
whatnot.
little brightness, yeah.
Yeah, some presence maybe.
Right, but when you're taking the line out and it's going through the house like that, they're usually EQing stuff, and even if they're not, I'm okay with the way that sounds. If they just take a line, and then that's my monitor.
Yes.
You know, a very expensive powered monitor.
Yeah.
Is,
but it feels and reacts the way that you want it to, which is important for your playing. Like if I don't have headphones in and I have to run my Helix straight to somebody, I never get the reaction from my guitar that I was intended to.
I like moving air.
Yeah. Well, and it can get so sterile in that kind of a realm.
It does.
So as you start to evaluate where you want certain effects to lay, do you start your chain with compression?
Yep. I started with compression. Do I have a noise gate on this one? I don't remember.
I had a lot of issues with the noise gates on there with just ruining the sustain of the instrument. And I don't know what I was doing wrong with that.
Yeah, this one does. So this is actually a new patch that I just made a couple weeks ago, mostly for, again, Zach Myers. I actually had a gig with him, and I'm like, hey, what do you think now that I've changed up a couple things on my guitar? He's like, I like it. I like your tone, but I don't think it has enough push when you need to take it over the edge. It's like, okay, so I basically just redid a new patch, and I think I went through and kind of fixed everything that was wrong with it in the first place. So this one, it's a noise gate, a very, very light compressor that I just pretty much leave on all the time. The other thing about this Helix is you see sometimes it doesn't shut off. I have some sticky switches. I just need to shoot some deoxide in there, but taking these things apart's a bitch.
I would imagine. I've never seen the inside of the Helix.
Yeah, it's not worth it. Volume.
You back that motherfucker up a lot?
What?
The Helix?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was good. The thing I love most about it is if it ever goes down, I'm going to Amazon order one of these things, boot my shit up, and return that as soon as I get mine fixed. You know?
Yep. And, yeah, see, there it goes. It didn't
Yeah,
even...
yeah, exactly.
There it goes. Oh, no. oh, there it goes. Yeah. So sometimes it does that, so I just need to take it apart and clean it. But then I run volume. I have a... sometimes I use this patch on jazz gigs, and Pat Metheny has this kind of like synthax sound where it's like...
I love that upper octave.
Right, it's kind of fun. And the other thing is when you throw enough drive on there, you can kind of just go... And it doesn't really... You kind of lose the attack, so you can kind of just throw a bunch of drive on there and just do whatever you want. It sounds good.
Do you find for tapping, that's the route you go?
For like that?
Yeah, for like fingertip.
No, most of the time if I'm tapping, I just tap like that. But and then I have a wah pedal, which I need to swap that out. I'm not crazy about how this one sounds.
I hate how those feel for a wah pedal.
Yeah, they're not very. You have to grease them up. There's a screw.
Yes.
That you can.
The world's thickest Allen wrench you can stick in there and change. But it's like then if I want to use it as a volume knob, it's
too loose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there's no great in between there.
Yeah, so I've got that. I need to swap that. And then I actually, one of my signature wedding band things, and just signature things I do, I stack drives like a motherfucker.
Yeah.
So this one, I've got, they call it the Kinky Boost. I don't know what it's a copy of because I don't pedal. Just gives it some more dirt, little more volume. And then I've got a Klon in the mix. And then I have a copy of the Timmy pedal, the Tima, as they call it on this one. And it really dirties things up. And then
is that the series that those run in if you wanted to engage all three?
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. And then I have this is the Kinky comp, which I have it dimed so hard it's a boost. And that was what was making the send clip earlier because this thing really adds some dBs to the mix. And that's what Zach liked, so I'm like, cool. And then I have a chorus that I don't use. I sometimes use on like shit.
Yeah.
I use it on that, and that's like the only time I use it. And sometimes I'll actually, like if I'm at a church or something that I haven't played and I need to like check and see, how it sounds, I'll swap that for a delay.
Nice. So you don't keep a delay normally on there?
No, when I'm in a setting where I know I'm going to be DI'd, I do. But
Okay.
if I'm just going straight like into the front of my amp, I've got enough reverb here because the other thing about this, I didn't even talk about the amp sim. I experiment with those a bit depending on. I dropped my pick. I'll get that in a minute. It kind of depends on what I'm doing. So like I think this one's a twin clone. Yeah, it's a twin reverb. Sometimes I'll use like a Marshall sound if I'm trying to get like the Jet Beck sound or something like that. Then I have like basically what the reverb in the amp would sound like if I'm DIing it, and I'll just shut the reverb on my amp off. And then I also have a hall reverb that really gives it some ambience. You don't hear it so much coming out of the amp, even if you turn it on. You mostly hear it in a DI setting.
Word. And do you have a fat pre-delay on that kind of thing to get out of your way?
Yeah, kind of. Let me get my...
So it's almost like a delay-esque scene of sustain. Because what I really love about a delay pedal, I prefer to have a pretty decent amount of feedback because I want to interact with where I was as we proceed. So I've never really gotten a reverb pedal, especially stacking reverbs, to kind of give me that euphoric feeling.
This one, if I throw it in there, I always click the wrong button. So I turn those both on. I'm going to throw this on there. Really gives it some nice spanking stuff.
But it has a pretty defined tail. I mean, everything's done at the same time.
Right.
Do you measure those against each other?
Yep. That's what I do because from running sound in different settings, halfway knowing what I'm doing, I like after this, I'm going to go, run sound at a church. And we also have like a live stream mixer too. And he was like, everything sounds muddy, man. And I was like, fucking swap out the reverbs for delays. He's like, well, I don't want the trail to go, bud, and then just stop. I want it to, kind of fade like that. And I said, that's sometimes what muddies things up because you get that trail going.
Yeah.
And it bleeds into everything else.
It's an infinite infusion of phase issues.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so with delay, there's a hard off. And with these, it's the same deal. Right? And then I add the other one in there. It's just a little bit of a longer tail. But even if I have this and I'm like... And if I were to, maybe throw a little more... It just sounds like I'm in a room.
Yeah.
And that's all I ever need. I never need it to sound like I'm in a,
in a hall and that kind of way.
exactly. Well, because if I'm in a hall, it's bouncing off the walls anyway.
Yeah, well, it's also a nice thing to be able to give your front of house the ability to implement their own verbs and delays. Like, if I hear a front of house engineer that really knows my material well enough start to engage a tap tempo at the tail of a phrase, it's like I feel that as a really affectionate way of saying not only am I listening, but I want to be part of the band. I'm participating in that kind of way.
Yeah.
So you need to leave enough of how they describe it in finance, like the initial lump sum, what would it start to the principal.
Yeah,
you need to leave just the principal so that they can start to mess with this thing.
I'm working on my entrepreneurship minor, and I don't know the exact term.
Just listen to Johnny Disco.
Sorry, Scott Belk.
Yeah, just call Johnny Disco.
He's already had me set up my Roth IRA and everything.
He told me he's not a financial advisor. I was like, what the fuck have we been paying you for, John?
No shit.
Jake Richter might actually be a financial advisor and be lying to us, though. There's a Facebook page that you can lean into, and he gets some good ideas.
Yeah, well, it's like one of these days I would love for Cricket and John Shield to get together and make the ultimate like musical lawyer / financial advisor dude. Like if I go out on the road and I'm a big name star, which is never going to happen because I don't want that anyway. I like being a sideman.
You don't think you'd ever want to have a project like look at the way like Tim Reynolds does his trio. It's like everyone has the ability to be a super competent sideman that serves a role, but it's not like it can fulfill your niche ideas that are only coming to you because you're the one antenna that's pointed that direction.
Well, then when you have off days, that's when you do it. I really have a lot of respect for like those guys who will go out on the road, they'll do whatever they're doing, and then when they're back in town, they've got their trio doing, Jimmy Smith organ stuff in some dark corner, and it's like, dude, that's what I want, Like if I can go out, play with some big or even semi-big name, do that for a while, and then just come back on the weekend like, hey man, let's go down to, I don't know, Ghost Baby and see if Justin will let us play like an organ trio date. Like, that'd be great. Or even just playing in some dark corner. I've had so many beautiful musical experiences, and some of them have been on big stages for thousands of people. Some of them have been in the studio. Some of them have been where there's two people there, two people and a dog, and they're not even really listening, and something in between. One of my favorite moments was when Tommy Lee did her EP release at Ghost Baby. Man, I was taking the solo on this. It was a cover tune. It wasn't even one of hers. It was Sour Candy. And I was really getting into the solo. And Mad Hands can follow you wherever you want to go. But my eyes were clenched shut. My glasses had fallen off of my face. I'm laying into this solo. And then when I finally open my eyes, I look over. Mad Hands is standing up, like literally kicking his foot into the drum, smashing the shit out of his cymbals. And I'm like, this is the greatest musical moment I have ever had in my life.
Yeah.
And you're just not going to get that up on the road, doing some, big stadium thing. That a lot of stuff like that just doesn't happen.
Totally. You need to have unrestrained parameters to get people to really let loose like that. But I think there's something about your showmanship that gives the rest of the room permission. I've always said this about people that are willing to get up and dance when they go see live music. The first couple to do it, the first person to stand up and go there, you are setting the tone of what is going to get the eyes of the room and what is just another person dancing.
Yep.
And it's difficult when you're in the performer slot and they're in the listener slot and they have a reservation about them that says you are the one that needs to push this glass ceiling or break this glass ceiling.
Yep.
When did you start to find that you wanted to be the loud, prominent character that you can be?
Ooh, that's a good one. I don't know. Again, it relates back to my dad's band. They were a bunch of old guys doing these covers and stuff, but people loved them. And I started thinking, why do people love these guys? They're not doing anything flashy. But then I started thinking, well, when I go see some other band, they're literally just standing there playing instruments. Then I started noticing, like, okay, well, the accordion players are going wireless. They'll run out in the crowd. They did this whole shtick of Ethel Merman. One of the accordion players would put on a wig and fake boobs and do an Ethel Merman impression, which is, not okay these days. But back then, it was
Things
fine.
changed. I mean, gimmicks definitely changed.
Gimmicks change, right? But, and then, there was the Louis Armstrong impression and stuff. And I started realizing, okay, they actually had, even for, a bunch of fat old guys, they really had some showmanship in that regard. My dad would always start his big solo of the night on the Hokey Pokey with a freaking beer glass or a beer bottle or something like that. And it was like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. Well, what if I did that? And it wasn't until I moved here that I really started realizing showmanship like that is okay, because at the high school I went to, they were very reserved in what they allowed, what they liked and stuff. Even in jazz band, they didn't really like it if you would, completely go off the rails and do your own thing. They didn't, not that it wasn't allowed, but they kind of frowned upon that. If, just stay there.
Academic jazz is different,
you
too.
play that thing. Yeah, they do. That's true.
Stand up out of your seat, and then sit down,
Yeah, well, we did funk tunes and stuff, But even in the bands I was playing in, it was very, stay there. But I think it was around, it was right around when I joined BWK. I think like my second wedding I did, I see Johnny Disco out in the crowd with his wireless rig, and I'm running, one of these like Sweetwater 20-footers or whatever, and I'm like, I can go out a little bit.
Yeah.
And people loved it. I was like, oh, whoa, okay. And it was the event coordinator for Rheingeist, I think. It was her wedding. And I remember I'm doing Mr. Brightside, and it's like in the middle of soul, and people are standing around me, and they kept crowding me, so I'm getting further on my knees and on my knees until I'm literally laying on my back with my guitar. There's beer being spilled all over my guitar. And she yells at me, is this easy for you? And I'm like, no! But I started realizing, okay, people like this. What else can I do that'll attract people's attention? And as much as I love doing showmanship stuff like that too, it's not an act. It is organic. I don't throw my guitar in the air unless I'm feeling, the power of the rock gods to make me throw my axe and get a cut on my face, which happened a couple weeks ago because I missed it.
That's very Johnny Disco reminiscent of you.
I was the first person I texted after the gig. It's like, hey man, I did a U.
Yeah. I busted my schniz.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because I have a habit of I sweat too much. I'll go throw it and it won't go up in the air. It'll kind of go in front of me and it'll like spin. And so I caught it, but my wireless pack slipped off, came back and hit me right here. Busted my glasses off. And then I caught it, but I caught it with the net going this way. And so one of these tuning pegs cut me right here. It was fine. And afterwards, I was saying, hey, can you go find my glasses? I lost them out there. And they were looking at me like, yeah. And then Gwen was on that gig, Alara, and she looks at me and she's like, Keith, you're bleeding. I'm like, am I? Oh shit, I am.
She would have a very Keith, you're bleeding on
You're
people.
bleeding.
On people. Other people besides yourself. Please clean it up.
I'm doing her album release in a couple weeks too. Yeah,
that's awesome. Is this a project that she's doing outside of her academic stuff?
Yeah, it is. And
Is this what Dylan produced?
I think so.
Cool.
Don't quote me on that, but yeah, no. And then I'm packing up my shiz and I'm driving up to Northside Tavern, and me, Disco, and Teddy Meckley are doing a Rush tribute. Yeah, baby, yeah.
I'm glad it's finally arrived. John's been waiting for so long for this.
And Mad Hands was going to do it, but he's got kid numero dos on the way. So.
My goodness, these boys.
You're telling me you're going to be there before you know it, man.
I'm looking forward to at least being part of the class. I don't want to be the one without kids. You know what I mean?
I was going to say, you're a freshly married man. You got some time, though.
Exactly, yeah. And she wants to go see a house pretty soon. It's like, I got to wait some time before we get a house, honey, But, that's our plate, where it's just the winter's showing up. It's scary to wonder if you have enough money after wedding season to get through the winter in a comfortable enough basis.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and then there's you kind of poking my shit, like, hey man, so how's Dan Varner as a father-in-law?
Well, there's certain alignments that you see happen in the world where you're like, you just feel good about it, Yeah. I could imagine that you have a pretty successful gigging life if Dan ever needed another guitar player besides Nick Netherton.
Yeah, but I don't think Nick Netherton's going away anytime soon.
Nick Netherton goes away once a month for at least a month. I mean, he just disappears. He's one of those guys.
Oh, man, but Nick is, seriously, I always say to people, like, if you've never heard Nick Netherton, he is probably the baddest picker on this side of the Ohio.
Yeah, and he's also one of those scary, humble guys where it's like you won't really get much of a read on him. He's a wonderful hang. He doesn't want you to inflate his ego. He barely wants to talk to you about the music at the end of the night. Like, he just loves it. He just thinks
But he's never sober.
Well, he doesn't need to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. He'll put down Crown with the best of them,
There was a gig, I think I was doing duo with Eric Layton or something, and we were somewhere, and Dan and company come in, and I'm like, oh shit, Nick's here, now I gotta play good. And I went up on break, and he's like, man, you sound really good. I'm like, I'm still learning how to do this thing, man. Hey, you got time for lessons? He's like, no, here's how lessons would go. It would be about 2 minutes of me showing you some country licks, and then you'll bust out some jazz thing, and there'll be 7 minutes of me going, hey, how did you do that? What are you thinking when you do that? I'm like, no, I think you got it the wrong way around. He's like, shut up. And then I said, hey, come up and play this song. And eventually after he does it, and then he picks up my guitar, and I'm like, I didn't know my guitar could sound that good. And this guy is like damn near stumbling drunk at this point. I'm like, how the fuck do you do that, man?
And he'll switch to fiddle and play Blacked Out and Crush.
Oh, my God.
And also his harmonies are very seamless. Him and his brother Brad.
Yeah.
They're so incredibly tight together. It's a special thing to watch.
It was a gig. They were playing on, and I'm forgetting the gentleman's name, but he's got a really big house up there. He also has I think he's got a mansion out in Anderson, and they had hired the Varner Netherton Revival to play on their dock.
Nice.
And Hannah and I show up, and we go down, and we just caught the tail end of the first set, and then the second set, one song in, Dan's like, hey, why don't you come up here and play my guitar? And I'm like, all right, cool. I thought it was going to be one thing. No, I ended up doing the rest of that show with him. But the scariest thing was I've got Dan's acoustic here, and Nick's got his telly with all his effects and stuff, and they're having me do a solo battle, and I'm like out here trying to make this thing kind of sound like an electric or something. But then I didn't know he played fiddle. Like, people told me, oh, he plays fiddle, right? And then Dan, like, later was like, "Hey, get your damn fiddle out," and then he pulls it out, and he's just got it plugged straight into his guitar board. Oh my God!
That's also the disturbing part of it, to realize that, like, he has these signals matched. Like somehow he's gonna make it happen.
Yeah, it's crazy. And after that, I was really blown away. I'm like, I did not know that there could be somebody who's just has this much raw talent and raw skill within them that they're just not even thinking about it anymore.
Yeah.
And I mean, sure, there's a million people, like Brad Myers is another one of those people. But after I saw him, that's when I started realizing, okay, maybe these people I think they're on another level.
Well, I think there's people that'll put you in that caliber, though, where for whatever reason, it's made a lot of sense to you from a very early age. So the sponge effect, like, nothing's gotten wrung out. Nothing's gotten lost in the process. And when you have a compounding education on something that you still love, like you went the academic pursuit, to still enjoy it the way you clearly enjoy it is the most valuable thing. And to be able to share that with your students and why you can feel that. That's an important piece of passing it along.
Right. Well, and it only seemed like the natural progression for me to, like, go to music school. And when I was looking at different places, it was all going to be the same thing. I was going to play guitar, unless I went to DePaul, and then I was going to play saxophone, which I'm glad I didn't do that.
Yeah,
Sorry,
imagine
Chris.
how that would have changed things for you.
Oh my God, I don't know what I'd be doing. I probably would have dropped out. Like,
wouldn't be making much money either.
Oh no, well, because how many classical saxophonists can you fit in a phone booth?
It makes you feel
All of them. I'm glad that I still have one of my horns, and I still have my flute. I need to get it worked on. I need to get some more lessons, but it's something that I know that, if after I finish, really where I feel comfortable with this, that I don't have to spend, 3 or so hours on it at minimum a day, that I can, maybe pick up the harp for a little while and work on my harmonica skills. And then I can pick the saxophone back up and be like, okay, where did I leave off? What can I do?
You still practice 3 hours a day?
I try to. I don't always get that. I'm at least playing my guitar for 3 hours in some capacity.
Yeah.
I mean, I teach a lot. I teach 4 days a week. And so, and sometimes I'm there 6 hours. So I'm at least playing. I'm not working on something new, but with just how busy my schedule has gotten, I try to carve out time. Like Tuesday night, Thursday night, Sunday night, and Monday night is when I really, really hard shed some stuff. Be it, work on some new, I don't know, let's see. What was it? I forgot how to play it now. Something like that. Something like that. That's, stablemates, carving some time out for that. Or if I'm just, learning some new, song where I have to, learn how to sculpt a tone on this, just work that stuff out. It's worth my while that I know that I have to spend a certain amount of time on jazz, because that's what I'm in school for.
Yeah.
But then there's this other, stuff that I do that I have to carve time out for. So it's kind of just this juggling act of keeping all these things in the air, rotating, so that I don't spend too much time on one thing or too little on another.
Do you think coming from a multi-instrument background has saved you from being someone that looks at the guitar as shapes, and instead looks at them as sonic relationships that can be it's a little more mathy in the quantification, but when you walk me through something like that, like these very tight jazz voicings, there's a lot of very intentional voice leading. There's a lot of things left out. There's a lot of things that are well placed for later use,
Yeah. Well, when I went into school, I mean, for sure it was shapes. I think every guitar player kind of learns the instrument in shapes, because it's so useful, and it's like, compared to so many other instruments, it's a few less things you have to worry about to get to a level where you could go out and gig, you could go out and record an album. You don't need to know everything that a piano player might need to know, or a saxophone player might need to know. And even when I think back on saxophone, even though it's been, at least 3 years now since I was really hard in the shed on that, I was thinking of that in shapes too, because, like, I was thinking of what keys I'm pressing down instead of thinking, oh, that's a D, that's an F, that's an A, right? Like, I knew they were there. I knew what notes they were, but I was still thinking in like a ba-da-da, like that seems like a shape of, you know, if I'm doing the same thing or if I'm just going DFA, right? I'm still thinking of that kind of as a shape. I know what the notes are, so if I need to analyze what I'm doing, I will. The biggest thing that changed how I thought about the guitar, though, was when I took the jazz piano class for my major. And, you know, Sergio Palmi's, I'll do my best Sergio impression. Keith, the goal of this class is not to teach you to be a good piano player. It's to teach you how to think harmonically. And I was like, okay, yeah. And then like 2 weeks into the class, I'm already like, oh shit. Like I'm thinking about how this note moves to that and this chord moves to that. And so then all of these, you know, like all those shapes make sense because to you or me, we would think like, you know, B flat triad. I don't even know what you would call that. A minor, right? No, that's a G minor 7. That's a C7 or a C, you know, 9 if you want to think of it like that, to an F major 7, and we're just dropping the root. But like, that's how I think of that now. And one of the things that I always love to like do with my guitar students is whenever they're trying to kind of pick my brain about the air, I'm like, hey, watch this. You know, pick a chord, any open chord. They'll play an A, they'll play a D, they'll play a G. I don't care what it is. I'm like, I'm gonna change up the bottom note. And I'm going to make that the root, and I can tell you what that chord is going to be. And then I can give you another name for it. So, you know, like, I'll take a D chord, and then I'll just swap that around. It's like, that's a, you know, a G major 9 or something like that. Or they'll play a D, and I'm like, oh, that's a C major 6/9 with a sharp 11 up on top of it or something.
Show me with playing exactly what you mean there. So you're taking a D shape, or you're going to make it a G major 9.
So, like this, we think of the root as D, right?
Yeah.
So we have a D chord. But what if this were to be our bottom note instead?
Okay.
Now it's a G major 9 essentially.
Gotcha.
Or if I
whereas like I would still think of that as a D with a G in the bass.
Right, exactly. Which it is,
Yeah.
you know. But that's another way that you could also think of that. And so I think that's also where I have a little bit of like a more unique background in that is that I have studied this stuff, and I've studied a long time studying classical saxophone. And I spent, you know, my earliest years in music were as a, you know, chorister, you know, boy chorister in the Episcopal choir. And so I learned all the classical discipline and how, not exactly how that works, because, you know, you never fully understand theory, you know, unless you're a doctorate, right? But I understand like what a lot of that stuff means and how that stuff works, but then I understand the jazz aspect of it. But then I kind of think of there's this middle ground between the two that is basically, what do you need to know to play pop music?
Yeah.
And at that point, that's where like, okay, somebody might say, you know, that's a G major 9. We might say that's a G over D. What would a classical person say? You know, and they could give you 40 different answers to that. What is the most practical thing to call that on a gig? Like, I'm playing some weird shape like this. You know, what am I going to call that so that people don't get confused? Because there might be someone on the gig who's been formally trained. There might be someone who's not. There might be someone who knows way too much. There's somebody who knows hardly anything at all. So if I'm playing this chord, you know, what am I going to call that? It's like, I'm just going to call that like an A minor over F, even though to me, that's not what that is. Really, this is more like an F with a G in it. So it's kind of like I hate saying like an F major 7 add 2 or something like that. But like that's what I'm thinking of, and I'll just call that the Steely Dan major if I'm in it, because you know that's like the Josie chord here. I just call that the Hendrix chord because everyone knows what that is. And then this one has been like a big point of contention is, what is this? And I've heard this a million different ways. I'm like, A flat major 7 sharp 11. You know, it's like, what do we call half of these things? And so sometimes, especially if I'm like writing music or something, I'll just write out the voicing, because that's the biggest way to avoid confusion of what the fuck do I call this, and what does its place in the song actually serve?
Yeah.
Like, for instance, you know, Sir Duke, you know, you can feel it all. What does that F minor 7 do there? Going to that E major, you know, like, what does that do?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, at that point, if you sit there and you try to analyze it, especially right before a gig, you're going to stumble on it. Just say, it just goes to F minor. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, intentional tension is something that you should do in the music. But when you're talking about spelling out chords like that, the vernacular is mainly about who you're talking to.
Exactly.
I mean, it's like it's only sexy for me to talk dirty to you in Dutch if you speak Dutch, or else
Right.
it's just like it's me talking gibberish to you. So why you use
I'd like it if you did that, though.
Well, listen, I don't speak Dutch, but I can definitely talk dirty and I can mumble well enough that you can probably get somewhere with it.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
but it's interesting when someone like yourself, that again, like I think of you as a guitar player, but clearly you are not. You're a musician, that this is your primary vehicle, but there's many lenses that you look through,
Yeah.
and you try to give the most optimal phrasing of how this fits and why this fits.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great testament to your playing. You're someone that serves the music with your whole heart, but you also serve people with a lot of care for where and what they're doing. And
Yeah.
As a band leader and as someone that tends to be handing off things a lot in my own life, I find that it's more centric to my own needs. Whereas I look at someone like yourself, and you've put so much time and effort into making this transaction more of just a loving exchange. You
Yeah.
know?
And I think, to me, too, whenever somebody calls me for a gig, I always kind of sometimes wonder, why the hell did they call me? And I've gotten a million different people saying, oh, you're a good hang, you're a good player. I think ultimately, to me, what it boils down to is when somebody calls me, what do they want? They know that they are going to get a good guitar performance. That's just going to happen, because it's just it's so below me to show up to a gig and not know the tunes. Like, I really make sure that I know the stuff, and if I'm kind of unsure of it, that's the first thing I'm just like, hey, I'm kind of unsure of this. I'll make it through, but I just want to let you know if like you hear something there, it sounds weird, it's because I'm unsure of it.
Yeah.
But beside that, I put on a show. I want to put on a show because that's what people want. And most of the time, if somebody's like, hey, keep the stage antics down, you know how many times I've heard that? 0. They love that stuff because people want to come up and talk to the band after that. They want, they want to see where they can follow them and stuff like that. But beside that, I always try to fit into the song. And one of my dear friends, Matthew Wollenhorst, said, you are probably one of the best chameleon guitar players I've ever met. I've got this board set up so that way if I really need to, do some, I can do that, but at the same time, I can, and that's, the Telly serves me well in that great. And I guess, the pink Telecasters have become my brand too, but
It definitely has. It's
Yeah.
definitely an association.
well, I've got 4 pink Paisleys now,
Nice.
I've kind of
Yeah.
brought into it.
Pigeonhole yourself happily.
Well, I would gladly paint a 335 pink Paisley as I could and just get away from the Telly for a little
That'd be
bit.
fucking wild. I mean, you have to do it with actual wallpaper at that point.
That's what this is.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like the real classics are the wallpaper. You got to go the wallpaper
Yeah.
route.
But, even for that, the chameleon thing is what it is. And when you're saying, I have like this deep, passion for what people are doing, especially if it's somebody's original stuff, I bring what I can to the table. But at the end of the day, I always ask them what they want. If they're like, keep it more simple, I'm like, okay, let's do this. And I could try something else. Okay, yeah, that works.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
When you're going from not knowing the material at all to I've done my homework and I'm ready to play on the show, what would you say are like the 3 to 5 most important steps in that?
Well, first thing is, this is kind of a side thing. Know the key. Know the people. That's a big one. Know the people you're playing with, because there have been times where I have mistakenly thought that, these people are going to be very, everyone brings their own thing to the table, and instead they want it exactly like the record. And so I'll show up and I haven't learned maybe this exact guitar fill, or, and it's a small one. Like the big ones I always learn, but it might be something where there's like a guitar playing power chords and then a guitar playing this like 1-note delay thing. And I learn the power chords, and I'm like, oh, where was that delayed guitar part? It's like, well, that wasn't the dominant sound.
Yeah.
I learned what I need to play to sound exactly like that. So, it's good to know that. And so now I've learned my lesson. It's like, how close do you want this to the recording? And if you're playing someone's original music, how much do you want this the way that you want it, or do you want me to do my own thing?
Yeah.
And luckily, most of the people that, you know, in these circles that I ask them, you know, what do you want me to do on your original stuff? They're like, learn the chords, do what you think is best. I mean, Tommy Lee, whenever we do her stuff, she lets me take solos that aren't on the records. You know, there's like Easy to Love You, and I think even you do it now. You put a big guitar solo in that thing. It kind of begs for one, you know?
Yeah, wherever she, you know, when we were making that EP, it was like, I don't think anything needs to be served here interest-wise besides the message that Tommy Lee's conveying. And it's interesting when you're trying to minimalize the studio recordings to just what needs to be there versus live. It's like, I want you to walk in the living room and sit on the couch and move over to the love seat, and I want you to sit on top of the mini fridge because it's going to cool that sweaty ass down, baby, and then come back to the couch. It's like we have so much more room to play. And if you're not the instrumentalist in the band, you don't find that out until you have players that are willing to go there.
And as for knowing the people you're playing with, you know, kind of have a rough idea of what your bandmates are like. You know, are you going to have a bunch of jazz cats on this gig? Are you going to have a bunch of session guys? There's a lot of overlap. Or are you going to have some, you know, straight rock and roll guys? You know, and whenever I ever get asked for a gig, one of the first things it says, who's on it? You know, because I need to know, how am I going to interact with them? How is my guitar going to fit with a keyboard player's part? You know, I'm going to play a little bit differently if, say, Disco is on the gig playing bass versus Teddy Meckley is playing bass. They're similar. They're both trained in jazz, but they play different. And so I know with Disco, he'll do a lot of discoisms, which I fucking love those. But I know that I might need to keep my guitar playing a little more simple, a little more in the pocket. Opposed to Teddy, he doesn't do as much of that stuff. So I have a little more freedom to do a couple fills. But then there might be somebody, I don't know, like as much as Kanan can do that, he stays in that pocket all night long, and he doesn't flash out until it's his time. So at that point, I can kind of do whatever I want.
Yeah.
You know?
Versus playing with someone like Sam Rusha, where it's like, Sam will surprise you with the way that he is going to reshape this section by like a really intentional choice that he's been holding on just to blow your fucking mind, you know, in the same way that you're talking about like the ways that you could describe this. Like, I don't know how to describe this, but the mood is different, and I just need to trust that he knows why we're here and where we're going again, you know.
And I like playing with people, especially like you and stuff, where they know that if they're gonna hire X, Y, and Z on this gig, that it's not going to be the same thing night to night. And I won't say I don't like playing with people in groups that really want the same thing night to night, because I do, you know, and that's a different discipline that, you know, I don't get too much of these days. But I really like that, because there might be some night where, especially if you're doing like a 3-night deal, where it's like the first night kind of stunk, the second night you're really starting to feel some stuff, there were some magic moments, and then the third night is just, whoa, this is great. And then you have that standard of this is what it can be, and then from then on you can kind of move things. And the more you play with different people, the more you learn that stuff, and you can bring different things of like, hey, what if we try this? I heard this was so and so, and they really like it. Like, you know, I'm trying to think of the wedding band context. I always throw in whenever they're doing Smooth, I throw in Havana. You know, or vice versa, and people start going, okay. The other one, I was on a gig with Teddy, and he's playing keys instead of bass. I'm playing guitar, and we just kind of look at each other, and we're on the same headspace. We just kind of nod at one point. We're in the middle of Treasure by Bruno Mars. We bust into fucking Donna Lee by Charlie Parker, right? And so I was like, okay, it doesn't quite work, but it's close enough. So the next BWK wedding I'm on, I tell all the horns, I'm like, hey, in the middle of my solo, we're going to go into Donna Lee. And everyone just kind of turned their head and went, what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
And then we did it the next night on a different tune, and everyone again is like, what the fuck is that? And so now it's kind of been this thing of, we tried one thing one time where we were on the same headspace. Now let's let's invade and
Yeah.
try it. And if somebody says we're never doing that again, I'm like, no skin off my bones. I just figure we'd try it.
Totally, but the arrangement comes to life when we can stumble into something special for the first time and refine it, and now it's part of the composition.
The
you
first
know?
time it's goofy, the second time it's magical.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And then maybe by the fifth time it's burnt, you know,
Yeah,
and it's time to move on.
Yeah, you can only, I sometimes wonder how long my beer bottle shtick on Sweet Home Alabama is going to last.
There's been people doing it much longer than you, and they'll probably outlive you. Unfortunately, those
Yeah.
drinkers are just resilient people. So.
Yeah, exactly. Opposed to the other night, Disco and I went to a bar after a gig, and I didn't even have that much, and I had to call my girlfriend and be like, honey, pick me up. I cannot drive. And I'm like, damn, I'm a lightweight now.
With
So-
John, you're always going to look like a lightweight. I mean, he likes scotch. He likes exotic scotch.
Well, I love exotic scotch. I love drinking that with him, but damn, he could throw 3 or 4 of those back, and I'm already starting to feel woozy by the second one, you know?
Oh, yeah. Johnny's put me in a grave many a night.
Yeah.
Well, brother, as we start to conclude this, what are some of like the musical aspirations that you'd like us to put out in the ether next year? Are there things that you'd like to be playing in, certain types of projects that you want people to call you for?
Yeah, well, as for that, I don't have very much music out there. If you dig up some of the stuff from Central Indiana from like 2015 to like 2020, there might be something in there that you can find that you can hear me on. But I really like doing whatever people want me to do. If somebody wants to call me to do a bluegrass gig, I'll do my homework. If somebody wants me to do, a funk gig, hell yeah, call me. I've been doing some original stuff. I got done doing one of Dylan's original projects. That was not long after Tommy Lee got done with that. And then, I'm doing Gwen's show in a couple weeks. And I'm just kind of thrilled that people are starting to call me for their original stuff because I love playing covers. That's how I pay my bills. That's how people know who I am. That's how people know the pink guitar. But, I love doing the original stuff, and I would love to do it in the studio too, but I perfectly am fine with, hey, Matt played guitar in the studio on my EP. Can you come play it live? Fuck yeah, because now I have to learn somebody else's guitar part, but I can kind of throw my own spin on it.
For sure.
And then people go, okay, that's cool. I'll give you a call for something else sometime.
Yeah, and I think people start to envision the next batch of tunes with someone else's thumbprint. It's like it's nice to be able to go in and leave no trace of what you would have done, and it's nice to be able to go in and be like, this sounds exactly like me. Like as much as I'd like to think that on Tommy's project that I was staying out of her way, people told me like there's certain things that sound like your regulars, and you try to isolate those and learn more about them in the process. Yeah. But you're certainly someone that has deserved the chameleon title, and you do it really well, brother. Where can people follow you at?
You can find me on Instagram. It's at K_E_Humphrey. That's my last name. You can find me on Facebook. Send me a friend request. Keith Humphrey. I've got a website, Keith Humphrey Music. If you want to take some lessons, shameless shout out to School of Rock, Northern Kentucky. My schedule's pretty full. Like they're starting to tell me that like my Thursday is more full than anybody else's. Students will hop ship from other instructors, and I hate it. They'll hop and come to me. I've had like 3. I call them refugees, the past few weeks. But if you want to try, you can hit me up down there. Hit me up for private lessons, anything like that as well.
Do you think you always stay with an institution like School of Rock, or would you ever move into having a more private practice?
I mean, right now, I like how flexible it is.
Yeah.
And I do private lessons outside of that as well.
Yeah, but it's a little easier to have someone else that's handling the scheduling, that's handling the changeover, and handling the payment. Yeah.
You're telling me. And plus, it's like, for me, sometimes I get real bad imposter syndrome of, why the fuck am I teaching guitar lessons when I'm taking lessons from Brad Myers, who's the
He's
cream
too
of
busy
the
for
crop.
that, It's like, there's a reason that people are in different chapters of their life, and you're serving those kids in a very fortunate way by continuing to be there and show them what they want to be shown.
Well, and I always tell them, the reason I'm here ain't because I can teach you. Anybody can teach you. The reason I'm here is because I'm gigging every weekend. I know what it takes to get from I'm playing in my basement to I'm playing every weekend, because I took that trajectory for 10 years. It took me 10 years to get from my basement learning tunes to learning tunes for gigs, you know. And I was fortunate. My dad started, you know, having me sit in on his gigs when I was 12. By the time I was 13, I had my first paying gig every freaking weekend. But still, that was playing Americana blues, man. It was 1-4-5, and now it's a lot more complex stuff. But it takes some discipline to do that. And again, if you come to me, that's one thing that you're gonna learn. You're gonna learn what it takes to play gigs.
For sure. Well, you are a bad motherfucker, Keith.
No,
Thank you
you're
so
a
much
bad
for coming.
motherfucker, man. Thanks for having me on, man.
Absolutely. Peace, players.